The Age of Uncertainty podcast by Nigel Baker. Episode 4, Distributed Scrum.
Oh, hi there. I'm afraid you just caught me reading a big old book. Epic books. Do you wonder, when the author started writing this book, do you think they meant it to be this long? I think it was Tolkien said, the tale grew in the telling. He didn't mean for Lord of the Rings to be that long when he started, it just grew and grew and grew. Welcome to this week's episode. What's it all about? Well, if you remember last week, I told you I was going to do a webinar with a local company and do a little sort of a chat with their Scrum Masters. Well, the tale grew in the telling. It turned into a 45-minute presentation and then about another 45 minutes discussion roundtable doing Q&A. So what I thought I'll do is, rather than put that out in one big 90-minute epic lump, I'll break it up into two 45-minute epic lumps. So this week, the presentation's coming out. A little Friday treat, 45 minutes on distributed Scrum. Again, apologies for the quality of the presentation. It was recorded off Zoom, and I put the slides together pretty much the day before. But I think it'll still be useful to a certain extent. Have a little look, see what you think about it, see what ideas challenge or you would like to challenge. And then next week at some time, I'll put out the Q&A with the Scrum Masters. Now that Q&A is probably going to be the only podcast next week because I'm actually doing an online training course, a virtual certified Scrum product owner, and that's going to take up a lot of the week prepping for that and delivery now. So I think it's only going to be one podcast next week just for that Q&A. But we'll see. You know, sometimes the tale grows in the telling. Anyway, I hope this little webcast is useful. I hope it'll be valuable for you. And as always, I'll be fascinated if you could give any feedback at the end and share it as much as you can if you feel it's useful, that is. Anyway, you should get on with the video and let me get back to my book. So distributed Scrum, basically. So that's the idea behind this presentation. Hello, is it me you're looking for? Now, some of you may not actually know who I am. So here we go. This is me. My name's Nigel Baker. I'm an Agile coach and certified Scrum trainer, and I have been for a very, 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 very long time. So I started off in IT as a childhood programmer, embarrassingly, and have been in IT my entire professional career. I started off doing Agile stuff back in Bristol, where we all are here, in British Telecom of all places. One of the most, I'm recording this, one of the less agile organizations on earth, I would suggest. I started there back in the 90s. And so I've been doing Scrum since about 2002, 2003, which is a long time for something that's supposed to be a bit new. So it was like 17 odd years now. I think you get, there are many serious crimes you serve less time in prison than I've done with Scrum. I've been an Agile coach since about 2005. And been one of these certified trainers running these certified training courses since about 2007. So that's about 13, 14 years now. Interestingly enough, I do a lot more training than coaching these days, which has got pros and cons to it. The pros are it's easier to train a course than be a coach, I'll be honest with you. But the cons are the coaching gives you so much more than training, to be frank. It gives you a real life experience of what's actually going on. And so I always think of myself, though I do these training courses, I think of myself as an Agile coach first and foremost, you know, someone actually on the ground really doing this stuff. Anyway, so where are we going now? Okay, this is the plan for this little presentation, this little workshop thing. Two parts, part one and the cleverly named part two. Now, part one is basically me talking at you for the next 20 or so minutes, 15, 20 minutes. Just some hints and tips on distributed Scrum from my own experience, from my own meandering anecdotes, things I've seen, things I've done, things I think we can do to help make Scrum in a remote setting work more effectively. And then part two, hopefully, will be the cool part. That's when we just workshop this a little bit. We're going to maybe use some of those techniques from part 1, but more interestingly, let's get into just discussing everything and anything. Anything you want to talk about, any questions, any queries, any statements you want to make masquerading as questions, that's part 2. We can theme it on distribution to begin with, but frankly, anything goes in that space. So we can talk about anything and everything that people need to talk about, okay? And that'll be part 2. So part 1, I'm going to sort of like monologue at you for 15 minutes, and part 2, we'll have a round robin chat about what we're going to do, okay? So let's see where we're going next with this thing. Okay, here we go. Right, first things first, you are so lucky. You are so lucky. There can never be a better time to be working from home than now. When I started doing Scrum, bearing in mind I worked for a telecommunications company, and this was what telecommunications looked like. Do you still have these in Hargreaves? The world famous spider phone?
Yeah, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Don't you just love a spider phone? Where you're sat there, people are elsewhere on the phone, and you're talking at them going, hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? And you're hearing, no, I didn't quite catch that. Could you repeat that again? Nigel's left the conference. Nigel has joined the conference. Yeah, agony. Now, we used to have, I don't know, telecommunications company. We had an actual virtualization room. We had a video phone. One, I seem to remember, locked away in a meeting room. I have to say, I never saw it, but I was told it existed. So, you know, if you wanted to use the mythical video phone, you could, if you had permission, which I didn't, and if you had someone on the other end of the video phone who could receive your signal. And that required another video phone, which no one had. So you kind of went back to the spider phone again. How you doing out there? I'm not kidding. I once did a sprint planning workshop. QA were based out of Hungary, and they were on a spider phone. So everyone just spoke at the phone, said, don't worry, we'll talk at the phone, we'll explain everything we're doing, don't worry. Okay, so anyway, and just stepped away from the phone. So, did you hear that? And they dialed off. Just put the phone down and went off and did something slightly less boring instead. So we today are so lucky to get away from some of this highly primitive, low bandwidth communication stuff. Now, there are some distributed recommendations I would make to most organizations that I'm afraid to say today we just can't do. You know, classically, if I'm working with remote teams, I would say, let's co-locate as much as we can. You know, a little bit of co-location goes a long way. Let's get together, get to know each other, and then split up across the world. Now, social distancing, right? We can't do that at the moment. But I'm assuming you all have teams where you've built a rapport already. I'm assuming that we're not going to try and build new teams at the moment. We're going to play the cards we're dealt, as we like to say, and utilize that prior relationships that we've got. And the other issue is equally as difficult. Like if I had a distributed team, I would say, okay, high cohesion, low coupling of work. Basically, take advantage of your shape. So if we had like 3 of us in Bristol and 3 of us in Kuala Lumpur, I would say, hey, why didn't the 3 of us in Bristol take one bit of work and the 3 of us in Kuala Lumpur take the other bit of work? How cool would that be? Except we haven't got that choice. Social distancing. But let's say we go back to back to reality in many months to come. Hopefully we can apply some of those principles. But at the moment, we got to play the cards we're dealt and move on. So tools, right? Now, I'm not a tool expert. I've never wanted to be a tool expert. I've never sat down, to be honest, even when I was a software developer, I never sat down and got really excited by the tool sets out there. I just quickly threw this slide together because we do need tools to help us communicate, and we do need to get our information in one place that we can access. The reason this slide is here is not to explain to you that, hey, there's this tool out there called Jira. We all know Jira exists, right? But the idea is that my issue is many people are using the wrong tools for the wrong jobs, right? So it's not that the tool is bad per se, it's just being used for the wrong situation. So I've sort of done this like this Venn diagram here. Now the green box, that's the classic agile planning tool stuff. So Jira, Dropbox, Pivotal, Trello, those types of guys. Right? In the yellow circle, that's the classic software development stuff, things like Jenkins, Git, Bitbucket, GitHub, places for storing our source code. And in the bottom blue circle is communication tools like Miro, Mural, Microsoft's whiteboarding stuff. Now, my first issue I have with remote work or distributed Scrum is many people use the green box rather than the blue, as the green circle rather than the blue circle. So they'll have a sprint planning event, they'll bring up Jira, or they'll bring up Trello, and they'll sit there and go,
okay, everyone, let's put our details into Jira. Ticket 79734-273. How many tasks are on Jira ticket 79?
And it just becomes very dull, becomes very uninteresting. Things like Jira, Pivotal, Trello, they're great refrigerators, but they're not necessarily great communicators, okay? So one thing I tend to do when I try and do distributed Scrum is use the right tool for the right job. I use things like the stuff in the blue box, things like Miro, Mural, the Microsoft whiteboarding stuff, to try and make our planning events real events, make them interactive, make them useful, make them everyone be able to access it and fiddle and play. And then at the end of those events, we can transcribe a lot of that material back into our planning tools where it can be stored nice and safely. So like Jira is a great refrigerator, put it in there, or Pivotal or Trello, great refrigerators, put it in there, but don't actually use those tools per se in the actual events because they tend to eat a lot of time up when we try and do it. And of course, that means the most important tool for all of us is stuff like we're using now, Zoom. I think Zoom's amazing. Yeah, I know, supposedly, Zoom has some really dark features in it. You all heard that you can actually track people's usage of Zoom. Supposedly, if you're the host, like Richard is, he could actually be checking up to make sure you're watching the video, or if you've got YouTube open for some particularly hilarious cat video instead. That is kind of sinister, to be honest. But I can tell you're watching a cat video, and you. No, all joking aside, you can turn that stuff off. But there's loads of things out there. And again, when we talk about shared tools, really this stuff, the communication stuff's the key stuff. I'm loving Zoom at the moment. I used to have a real affair with GoToMeeting. I really like that as well as the video conferencing stuff. There's Teams up there, Microsoft Teams, Outlook, asynchronous communication. Emails are great, by the way. There's always a standing joke. Does this have to be a meeting or could it just be an email? Well, these days, because the meetings are quite hard to set up online, the more emails, the better for that. Now, I've been doing recently Discord. And this has been friends of mine, friends from university. We've been using Discord, which is the third icon on the second row. Discord's like a gaming server thing, but we found it quite useful for communication. It's just finding the right tools for you, really. By the way, everyone, you can step in now. What's that one? I stole this graphic from online, and I have no idea what this one actually is. Any idea?
No, I haven't seen it before.
No,
I've never seen it before either. It may just be a made-up one, but I just do not know. So anyway, anyone watching this video at home, please tell me what that one is. Anyway, but the idea is, so it's not just about, this stuff, the planning tools or the code source control or the visualization tools. It's about the communication tools as well. Slack's brilliant. I like asynchronous communication. It's really, really useful. We just need to make sure we're using the right tool for the right job. Don't have a video call when you can just Slack someone, but correspondingly, don't have a 90-minute Slack text fest when you could just pick up a video call and chat and get it sorted in 30 seconds. Try and make sure we use the right tool for the right job. Now, where are we going now? Oh, here we go. Okay, so it's interesting as well. So there's been so much advice online in the last few days. Have you noticed on LinkedIn how everyone's all of a sudden become remote working experts? It always used to be like agile. I'm a senior agile consultant. I'm a cloud consultant. Bitcoin, that was a great one. I'm a senior Bitcoin thought leader. Well, these days, every man and his blooming dog has stuck remote into their job title on LinkedIn. So now you've got these remote thought gurus. But what I found quite useful was this guy, Sam Storm, who's just a normal human being working with normal teams. He said, look, for him, just get your basics working well. You can get away with a lot of stuff in real life that's hard to get away with virtually. You know, you can improv a lot of things when you're sat in a room together that's actually quite difficult to do when you're online on a Zoom call like this. So he just said, look, get a clear agenda, clear roles and responsibilities in your meetings, clear expectations of your participants, i.e. what do we hope to get out of this blooming thing, and just a bit of prep beforehand. This is not improv comedy. You don't have to turn up and be spontaneous on the ground. Do a bit of prep beforehand, and that will just help the thing move smoother. Now, again, you may joke and say, well, that's obvious, Nigel. Well, I know it's obvious, but the trouble is a lot of agile is about doing the simple things well. It's the same thing with meetings, you know, get agenda, roles, participants, prepare, and that can just help our online events move more smoothly. The best bit of advice I could ever give is the mute button. You know, mute. Do you remember this guy, by the way? Hello, I'm on the phone. Yeah, mute whenever you're not talking. You may not realize there's background noise. There's always background noise. So just turn off your microphone as much as you can. It just makes things move a lot smoother again. And what you're going to find is, and daily scrums tend to be a bit longer, because this is our main sync point in Agile and Scrum, okay? And if we're doing it in real life, a lot of people find their daily scrums become quite light as they're communicating and collaborating all the way through the day. Trouble is, that communication is going to be a lot less in a distributed environment, which means those scrums are going to be far more important. They're people's touch points. They're not just going to be about, they're not a status update anyway, but they're not just going to be about where are we in terms of work. They're going to be where are we in terms of human beings. You know, grab a cup of coffee, you know, have a drink, have a chat with each other. This is the time when we can sync up with each other and just see how we're doing as a team. Hey, how's it going for you? It's not going great for me. You know, just bring a bit of that humanity to the experience. So what you may find is just scrums get a bit longer, just to have a bit of that human contact there, a bit of that human relationship there. But generally, keep your meetings shorter. People get, and I can't think of the right word here, they get meeting fatigue, basically, a lot quicker online when you're sat there trying to nod and pay attention, you know. By the way, I've heard some great advice with Zoom. Some people are using the backgrounds in Zoom and just taking a photo of themselves and then using that and just walking off. so the photos are... Nigel hasn't walked off, but could do that. I hope we could just keep our meetings shorter instead. And that's why I love this tweet. I saw it yesterday. Hey, I was just on a Zoom call that ended auto-magically. By the way, auto-magically is a autocorrect error from automatically. But again, that's a brilliant word, auto-magically. I was just on a Zoom call that ended auto-magically after 40 minutes because the organizer was on a free tier. This is the single greatest advance to meeting productivity that I've ever seen. Would pay extra for this feature. Time box everything, right? Time box your meetings and kill it when they're done. Don't let the things get too long. Time box your agenda points on your meetings as well. So don't just say, oh, we're going to have 2-hour chat. Time box every single segment and move on. Okay, 15 minutes on this, 15 minutes on that, 15 minutes on that. And it just gives you a bit of rigor to keep you moving through your online events, to keep it running sharper and shorter. So, yeah. What people are going to find is you're going to have to bring your whole self to this now as well. So you notice here, I've not got some fancy background up. I have got a green screen, by the way, over the other side of my office, which I could put behind me to make myself look more professional, but why hide it? You know, people's cats jump into camera, you know, meow. I had it the other day. I was filming a video and my kids jumped into shots. So I was in the middle of filming a podcast and my 2 kids come storming in the room. So do not deny reality. You know, we are all working from home. Let's just embrace it. We're in our rocking chairs. We're in our front rooms. You know, we're sat with a cup of coffee. Is that Birmingham United's football stadium? Or Aston Villa? Anyway, doesn't matter. But wherever we're sat, where is it?
Turf Moor, it's Burnley's football.
Burnley's! Oh, Burnley's, of course. How could I have forgotten Burnley? Anyway, but Burnley Stadium, wherever we are, just embrace the truth of the situation. Bring your whole life. The kids will scream in the background. Your cat will jump into camera. Just embrace it. And if you embrace it, it gets a whole lot less stressful. You know, if you're forever trying to give this professional sheen when, in fact, your life behind you is blowing up, it's going to be quite difficult. That's why establish known hours. Make sure you know when each other's working. Make sure you can overlap that as much as you can. But understand that people have got other calls on their time. So we have a team in another country. We need to know when they're working and when we're working, so we don't accidentally ring each other at 3 o'clock in the morning. But I don't know if you'd see this photo. This is Joe Wicks. So Joe Wicks is currently dominating my life because he is at the moment on YouTube every morning at 9 a.m. doing PE for kids, right? And it is some hard PE. I've done a couple of the sessions and it's not designed for a fat guy like me. But my life is configured around my children doing PE with Joe Wicks at 9 a.m. Okay? Now this means the bandwidth in the house goes down as they're on YouTube in the front room doing their exercise. So if I'm gonna have any form of Zoom call or any form of video conferencing, I'm not gonna do it at 9 a.m. because that's when the kids are doing the Joe Wicks PE. That's just embracing reality, embracing our known hours. I'm just starting a bit later. It's that sort of stuff we need to talk about in teams. We just need to be honest, you know. Those of us who've got children, we're having to homeschool at the moment. And so homeschooling, people are doing loads of videos online for this. So it's not just Joe Wicks, it's like Maddie Moat from CBeebies, it's Carol Vorderman. Yes, that Carol Vorderman. By the way, if this is the international viewer who doesn't know who Carol Vorderman is, don't worry, you don't need to know. But Carol Vorderman is doing maths every day, but we need to schedule this stuff in. We're gonna have to make our lives work, and now everything's been locked together as we're trapped at home. We just gotta communicate that to each other honestly so we can work effectively together, honestly. Don't let anyone go dark. Here's an issue in the office. You can tell in the office if someone's starting to struggle. If my kids are being a pain, if my home life is hard, if my health was weaker, if I was feeling stressed and I was sat next to you, you could tell. I'll be sat like this. Or maybe not as bad as that, maybe like this. How you doing, Nige? I'm fine. Am I fine? You know, you can tell reading people's, as Scrum Masters, you know, reading people's body language, tone of voice is so important. People often say so much when they say nothing at all. How are you? Yeah. The trouble is, with online work, you can't tell. Is that email written in a way that is expressing distress? Or is it just how they always write an email? And so we've got to touch base with each other more. And I hate the word touch base. Let's never use that again. We've got to just talk to each other more, communicate our whole selves to each other a bit more, and just make sure people out there understand we're there for them. As Scrum Masters, it's so important to be good examples of good behavior. And that's not just good corporate behavior. That's like self-care. You know, we always say, put the oxygen mask on first before you put it on someone else. So as a good Scrum Master or coach, you've got to make sure you put your mask on first, but correspondingly, you've got to visualize and show that behavior to the rest of your teams so they know you're there for them, we're there for each other. Otherwise, at home, some of us may live alone, okay? This is a very different, I know someone personally who lives alone in a different country. This is becoming a very difficult experience for them emotionally. And so as Scrum Masters, we're not therapists, that's not our job, but we just need to be good human beings and reach out to those people and stay in contact with our colleagues to build a little human network there for them. Oh, this is interesting. So this is not at all to do with, well, it is a little bit. This is Kent Beck. You know Kent Beck, one of the inventors of extreme programming? Kent recently has been experimenting with this 3E model: explore, expand, extract. It's fascinating. I put a little URL down the bottom so you can visit it if you want to visit and learn more about it. But he just talks about different styles of work or different ways of experiencing projects. Explore is when you're discovering more, you're on a new journey, you're trying out new ideas, you're experimenting. Expanding is once you've found your fit, now growing into that. And extracting is like mining. You know, we're doing the same old. We've built a good experience. We know what we're doing. We're now extracting that good value from those well-driven, those well-created minds. You know, those tracks have been laid down in the soil. Those cart tracks, and now we can follow them again and again and again. The reason I mentioned this here is, for me, remote work is far easier when it's in extract, when we all know what we're doing, we've all been doing it a long time, we all know where we are and where we're going, we can keep mining how we used to, prior relationships, prior product, prior experience. It's quite easy. My worry is with remote and distributed Scrum, it's a lot harder when it's in explore, when we're trying to discover more, where it's fuzzy, where we need lots of feedback, lots of communication, lots of discussion. It's not impossible. In fact, loads of us do it there. It's just a more difficult problem than the extract phase, when we've got a lot of stuff pre-set up that we can just exploit, basically. Exploit those methods so we can exploit that content. But this is the final bit I wanted to talk about. So the majority of my good practice or experience in distributed Scrum comes long before Scrum. So my mum and dad, right, who have passed away now, they've been 7 and 5 years they've been gone. So they were old at the time. But they were big into amateur radio. Ham radio, don't you ever heard of amateur radio? It was huge back in the 70s and 80s. The idea of people, a bit like CB, people picking up a microphone and talking to people across the world, you know, talking across the world with large aerials in their gardens, communicating before the internet was really the big thing it always was. Now, my mum and dad used to drag me, right, and I literally mean drag me, to their weekly club. They would go to the South Bristol Amateur Radio Club, right? They would go every week for 30 odd years. I managed to back out after the first 10 years, thank God. I got old enough so I could run away. But they took me every single week, and I would hang out with these amateur radio enthusiasts, right? And what was interesting was I took a lot of what they used in ham radio, amateur radio, and actually applied it when I was doing distributed Scrum. Because they've been having the same problems about cross communications, confusions, the same problems of talking over the airwaves in a mass group that we have had on Zoom now, they had back in the 60s and 70s with amateur radio. So what I just did was I went on some of these amateur radio websites and just pulled off a few hints and tips of those websites about code of conduct and how good ham radio enthusiasts should work. Because actually they completely cross-apply to us. Here's tip number 1, code of conduct. Okay, so in terms of amateur radio, they talk about 2 aspects to their code of conduct. One is practical rules, which we're going to come across in a minute. How do we just work together practically in terms of remote settings when we communicate with each other? But the other one, which I think is quite important, is ethics, showing the right behaviours in the right way. So in amateur radio, don't bother reading all this. This is, I've grayed out most of it because it's about amateur radio. But they would talk about there needs to be some sort of social feeling, some feeling of what they call it brotherhood, but I would call it familyhood. So we must show tolerance for each other more and more and more. Show politeness, show comprehension, explain more clearly. Because it's so easy when you're spread across the world to be a little bit more brusque, a little bit more brutal. What do they say about people? They say people there, that person's brutally honest. You ever heard that phrase? That person's brutally honest? Well, my concern with that phrase is that the word brutal has far more focus than the word honest. And so it's easy to be brutal to each other over an email. It's easy to be curt and terse over a Slack message. And so, same thing with video calls. So the idea in amateur radio is make sure you're a good human being first. Make sure you understand we're one community here. It's not a competition. Understand tolerance for those that may not fully understand your position, your opinion. Be polite to each other. I always joke about agile coaching. If Scrum Masters, by the way, you're agile coaches as well. There's 3 things agile coaches don't do enough of, which is silence, space, and manners, right? So silence, give people a chance to have their say. Give people space to try new ideas. Show respect. Give people respect. Show dignity. Act in the right way. Be humble. Show humbleness. These are all things we can do to help make these things work a bit better. And comprehension. Understand that not everyone thinks how we think. Not everyone may know as much as you do. We've got to be very, very reasonable with each other. It's very easy when we distribute to forget our human principles, and things can get tough if we do so. But then we get into practicalities. So here is a list of ham radio language. So we're going to QRM the QRN and be in QRV with the QSL, and don't bother reading that language. That language is not so important to us. But what is important to us is developing a shared vocabulary, making sure we all understand what people mean when we're talking about things. A lot of the visual cues are going to be less evident or less obvious in this situation, so we're going to have to be quite careful with the terms we use. So just make sure we all understand what we mean when we say certain things. Make sure we all appreciate we're working in different countries in different ways, making sure we all appreciate what someone means by tested, for instance, what someone means by released, for instance, what someone means by, oh, that documentation is done, for instance. Just making sure we're very clear and explicit with that. Again, in Scrum and Agile, we have things like definitions of done, definitions of ready, acceptance criteria, but there could be 1,001 other things in your space where you've got to be very careful with that language and make sure everyone understands what they mean. And avoid fantasies. Amateur radio, this was something really interesting. They say be careful with, like they would talk about the phonetic alphabet, the Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, etc., etc. They would say be careful with using that alphabet because you may use some different words that people in another country may not understand. So you say A for apple, F for funny, and they may not understand actually what you're trying to communicate. I would say something similar in the Scrum world and the Agile world. Try to keep your references lower when you're working in international teams. Try and keep your terminology clear and concise. I mentioned Carol Vorderman earlier on. Now, who here? Let's get a show of hands in this lovely chat. Show of hands. Who here knows who Carol Vorderman is? Show of hands for the Carol Vorderman. Carol Vorderman. Let's have a little slide down. Carol Vorderman. Carol never made it to Poland, did she? You've missed nothing by not knowing who Carol Vorderman is. Z grades, no, let's not be harsh, it's being videoed. A minor celebrity off a minor TV show 20 years ago. That's Carol Vorderman. And so we've got to be careful with references like that. For a lot of people, a cultural reference can be a verbal shortcut. But for those of us who don't have that reference, it's not a shortcut at all. It just confuses the situation. And so they always say, be very careful in distributed teams, be clear with your language, avoid fantasies, be very practical in how you speak. It helps communication become more clear. What else is there? Oh yes, check your transmission quality. So yesterday, Richard and I had a quick, 5-minute call? Using Zoom just to make sure it worked, just to make sure we could hear each other, just to make sure the volume worked appropriately. I would suggest something similar for us. Ham radio enthusiasts check to make sure they can be heard, to make sure they're clear, and to make sure they're not blowing everyone else out the water. How many conference calls have you been on where someone is and it destroys it for the rest of us? And so check your signal, check your transmission. A good ham radio enthusiast knows that they have a responsibility over the airwaves. So do we as good communicators in Scrum. And a good ham radio enthusiast listens. They understand, they don't know everything. They've got 2 of these and 1 of these. Listen twice as much as you speak. Listen. Pay attention to what people say. Don't just jump in with your opinion, you know. Don't just break in because you feel the need to say something. It may not be as important as you think. Interrupting is rude. It's rude online as well as being rude on the radio or rude in person. That's why I used to like to use things like this on the screen, speaker tokens. Now, a speaker token could be as simple as a card or holding your hand in the air or something, but the idea is whoever's holding the token is the one talking and everyone else waits. Now, in radio, what they will often do is if someone's talking like this and someone wants to contribute, they would just quickly say, break, and sort of step in with the word break, because it's an audio medium, so they can't put their hand up. No one would notice an amateur radio, would they? But they'd say break, and it breaks, and then when the person's finished talking, they would say something like, okay, breaker, come on in, and that person can come in with their point of view. We can do something similar in our space, you know, in terms of, jump forward to this one here. So we could do something similar in our space, maybe say break or something, or a visual cue, a hand raised in a call. Zoom's got that functionality built in, that sort of thing, just to show, oh, I've got a point I need to make, and let the person finish their sentence and then hand off to the breaker. Timeouts are interesting as well. So in amateur radio, when they're communicating to each other, they often use something called a repeater, which is a bit like Zoom. It's a tool to allow 2 people to connect to each other or multiple people to talk at the same time. But the great thing about repeaters are they break your call after 2 minutes. So if you're talking like me on your radio for 2 minutes, chatting away, 2 minutes out, bink, you're dropped off. They time box everyone's content. And that's brilliant. I do the same thing in real life. I do it called the 5-minute rule. You may have heard of this rule for meetings. The idea of the 5-minute rule is anyone can talk about anything they want up to 5 minutes in a real life meeting. When it goes over 5 minutes, anyone else in the room can stop it. So as to avoid, let's say we're all having a really good conversation for 20 minutes, it goes on for 20 minutes. Let's say we're having a conversation that I love for 2 minutes, that's fine. But if it's a conversation that I love, but you don't, we can stop it after 5 minutes. Any person can say 5-minute rule and stop it. Now, I tend to use these cards. We've got these cards in Agile Bear, these facilitation cards. So we tend to use these. So you don't have to have a card, but you can just use them like this. Hold the card up. 5-minute rule. Okay, I'm calling 5 minutes. That was very useful, Nigel. Thank you, but let's move on. You can just do whatever you want. Tap a watch, anything like that, just to signal, let's move on. If I was doing an online session, I would probably stick closer to the amateur radio guys of 2 minutes rather than 5 minutes, because 5 minutes is an awful long time on any form of video call. But that idea of timing out, the idea of time boxing people's content, not just agenda items, can keep things moving as well. So you don't end up with 2 of you ping-ponging backwards and forwards and another 7 or 8 of you just dying a slow death. That's why, so when my mum and dad were doing this all the years ago, they used to have what they called a net. Now again, if you're an amateur radio person, you'll know better than me. This is 20 years old memory. But the idea of a net was everyone chats. In the evening, they're all talking at the same time. Well, no, they all take their turn. So what they would do is literally just take turns. On whoever turned up, they would go in that order. So I would speak for a couple of minutes, and I would hand off to the next person, Richard, who would speak for a couple of minutes, hand off to the next person, and literally just go around the circle. If someone's got nothing to say, they'll just say, pass, and just pass on to the next person. So everyone gets to say, right? So just rotating it round in turn, because they've got no visual cue mechanism. That's one way I've done visual calls before. Just everyone takes turns. Everyone has their 1 minute, their 2 minutes, and passes on to someone else. Now, if you can't wait that long, you can do things like I've got on the screen here, excuse me cards, say, oh, hand raised means, can I have a go next, to step in. So well, 3 of us put our hands up and we just take those people when we need to do so and let them step into the call. And that brings me to this, stacking and tracking. I find these 2 facilitation techniques very powerful in terms of online mediums. Tracking is when you've got like some facilitator explicitly paying attention to that material. So they're paying attention to who's raised their hand, who hasn't. They're paying attention to visual cues. So sometimes it may not be someone's putting their hand up, but they may be going, bouncing in their chair like Tigger. You can see they really want to say something. And so the facilitator is they're conducting the meeting. They're paying attention to those cues, not so much the content, but the cues from people to make sure everyone gets a say. Oh, okay then. So we'll look up here and go, okay, you step in then, or you step in. If you want to be a bit more explicit about that, you can do stacking. And stacking is when either the team or the conductor or the facilitator just numbers people and gives them a say that way. So let's say I said something particularly controversial. Twixes are overrated. Oh my God, everyone thinks a Twix, how can a Twix be overrated? A Twix is the finest chocolate bar known to mankind. How could you put, there's 2 bars in 1 packet. I've not had a Twix in 3 days because I'm in isolation. How dare you comment on Twixes? So everyone sticks their hands up. Oh, I need to talk about Twixes, Well, what you can do is, as a facilitator, you just give everyone a number. Okay, Nigel, you're 1. Richard, you're 2. And then you just go through the numbers. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and just run through the stack that way. Or you can do it yourselves. You don't have to have a conductor do it. So as a team, you just do it. You just put your hand up. And if you notice someone else already got 1 finger in the air, you put up 2. And if you see someone else has got 2, you put up 3. And just like that. And then you can just go, okay, 1, and then 1 goes, and when they're done, then 2 goes, and when they're done, 3 goes. So again, stacks everyone up so everyone can have a say, but we're not all jumping onto each other at once and all trying to jump into the call at once. Else you just end up with the loudest person winning, which is people like me, basically. Like a barking sea lion, loads of noise, not necessarily the most important thing to be said. So stacking and tracking, you do this in real life. It's far easier in real life, but on online medium, you can do it as well. That's why, let's see what I'm going next. Oh yeah, that's why I think this is a great idea. If you are going to do serious events online, maybe 2 facilitators may be what's needed. Someone tracking technology and someone tracking humanology, right? Because if I'm trying to pay attention to who's speaking, who isn't, who wants to contribute and who doesn't, what happens if the call drops out or the sound quality gets a bit low or there's 1,001 things going on in the background? I know as a trainer, at the moment, a lot of trainers are starting to do these sort of certified courses online. They're sort of allowing them just temporarily to be running sort of a certified Scrum Master and things like that virtually. But a lot of people are having a second facilitator in the background looking after the tech so the trainer can do all the actual content, all the conversations and pay attention to the people, And I think that would be a very powerful thing to do as well in terms of the tech we've got these days. They say this stuff's foolproof, but let's be honest, they're underestimating the ingenuity of fools. This stuff will go horribly wrong. We need having someone there who can just run, maybe a Scrum Master, just pair. I love pairing as a technique. So we pair, okay, I'll do tech for your event if you do the tech for mine. And so that way we can each work together on this, helping each other out through the experience. That's another thing we could do to try and make this stuff work a bit better. Are you not entertained? Everyone videos. What do I mean by that? This is not a way to pick on the introverts or anything like that. I don't actually mind if our Scrum team occasionally want to be in their pajamas and just do it voice only. I'm not too precious about that. But what I mean in terms of Scrum and everyone videos, I mean stakeholders, and I mean stakeholders in reviews. This is not like poor old Russell Crowe here with a faceless audience judging him as he fights for his life. the idea of reviews, it's a collaborative affair. The stakeholders are a key part of that affair. And if they're going to be working from home like the rest of us, that's great, but we need to see how they feel about this stuff as well. Else, what you will find is you could be broadcasting to a very uninterested audience, and you just don't know. You're spending ages getting your review together online, broadcasting it one way, and on the other end of a phone line, someone's playing Angry Shark or something on their phone. And so I always get everyone videoing in, everyone taking part, all videos into it, and see what's really going on. I saw just online yesterday, I can't remember who it was, and I can't remember what the company was, which is the best anecdote ever. But the CEO of the Building Society came in on Sprint Review because it's an urgent thing for the virus. And he just popped his head in to say, good work, you got it there, I'm glad. But he videoed in, you know, and I think that's the key thing for me. We're all in this together. The stakeholders are a key part of this, along with the Scrum team and everyone else. They should be videoing in as well, so we can see what's going on. So it's not just judging the product, it's judging their reaction to the product. Because you know, we joked earlier on, oh my God, everything's horrible. Imagine one of your stakeholders doing that in your review, and you could see it. Eek, that would be bad news. But the good thing about Scrum is it doesn't make bad news good news, it just gives you bad news early. And so that's what I would do as well.
Thank you for joining us on the Age of Uncertainty podcast. Next episode, talking distribution with Scrum Masters.